several reasons. I mean, this is for the great job that has been done by the Commission and by our Commission in particular on the issue of digital economy in particular, trying to figure out what it is, a digital value, first of all. And recently we had a very important decision basically of the Court of Justice of the European Union on 7 September, which confirmed the decision by the European Commission that Ireland granted Apple illegal state aid form of tax breaks amounting to 13 billion euros. This was an important decision not only for competition law, it was an important decision as well for taxes. We know all that, of course, the Court of Justice made the decision on the basis of the legislation on state aid rather than on tax, of course, but actually it opened an important reflection on digital taxation in particular. And before that, however, there is the issue of trying to figure out what is a digital value. Do we have value coming from data? If this is the case, then we need to think as well how to tax them. And you know, today the artificial intelligence process is putting a challenge very important, in particular when we need the worker, and firms need the worker, to be taxed for the value that they create. And you know all that we have established our welfare system, our pension system on the basis that we have workers to be taxed and firms to be taxed in order to maintain pension, subsidy, welfare expenditure and tax amount, which is enough. Once we do not have workers, actually we need to look for something else in order to create the base for taxation. It's an important issue which is of course very much debated at university level, in the academia, but I think that, as I said before, research and politics do not have the same time constraint. This is, unfortunately, a very important issue of which we need to take care. We are policymakers, we have different time constraint, but anyway, we can use research and opinion and data coming from the university. Now, I leave the floor to Madame Vestager, but before that, I will tell you that you will have 10 minutes, and then as before, we will open the floor for Q&A session, and each member will have 2 minutes, as usual, for the question, and you will have back up to 3 minutes to answer. Thank you very much again for being here. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, honourable members. It's indeed a pleasure to be here to exchange on the recent judgment of the Apple state aid case in Ireland. As you will know, the judgment of the European Court confirms the decision of 2016 by the European Commission that Ireland granted Apple unlawful aid, and Ireland will have to recover that. This is good news for European citizens, for tax justice, for a level playing field within our single market. And the Apple case obviously is also a win for the Commission. But that kind of wins, they do not come without support. And I want to wholeheartedly thank the European Parliament and especially the members of this committee for unwavering support. This has been very important. It has been a decade where we have been focusing, and that cannot be done because it has been uncharted territory to some degree. A lot of work has been done in the last Commission mandates to improve tax fairness. And I think also the Commission state aid cases, they have helped to trigger legislative reform. Because the state aid instrument as such is not the main road to tax justice. It is one of the tools, but of course, legislation, enforcement of legislation, that is the main route to better taxation. And I think the advocacy of your subcommittee has also been decisive in making this possible. We have achieved important changes in these 10 years, and it is true to the combined effects of state aid enforcement and legislative action. So let me touch upon both and give just a few perspectives for the future. First, as regards state aid enforcement. So state aid granted in the shape of a fiscal benefit, that is nothing new. State aid can come in so many forms: a grant, a guarantee, a loan, a fiscal advantage. However, back in the days, a series of parliamentary investigations in the US and the United Kingdom put the very spotlights on the very low effective taxation for quite a number of multinationals. Also in tax jurisdictions of certain EU member states. Corporate tax avoidance were also put in the spotlights by some of the investigative journalists. LuxLeaks, in particular, had a corporate tax focus. And I think it's really, really important also to thank the journalistic groups for their ability to make it known for everybody and to make it understood by everybody what we are dealing with, since these are very, very complex cases. So the investigation into tax rulings initiated in 2013, as said, uncharted territory, much broader than what we have been doing before. And as said, supported by the European Parliament, civil society, European citizens who were expecting that there was a response to this. It was laid open that so many businesses did not pay their fair share, so a response was expected. Of course, that implies taking risks. If you don't want to take risks, you cannot go into uncharted territory. So we investigated several tax rulings and aggressive tax planning measures under state aid rules. The built-in excess profit scheme, Amazon, Engie, Fiat in Luxembourg, Ireland for Apple. Two takeaways when we look at the win and the losses of the court cases. First, member states, they have exclusive competence to define their corporate taxation system. In other words, member states have a high degree of autonomy in designing their fiscal rules. Second, tax rulings do not escape EU state aid rules. Once member states have exercised this fiscal sovereignty that I just spoke of, well, then the tax administration, they need to abide to their own rules. So you can set your own rules, then you need to follow them. The Commission then carries the burden of proving that member states might deviate from their own parameters. Then, as regards the legislative field in member states, so the investigations of the Commission has also, I think, decisively contributed to a mind shift, a change in attitudes among member states. I just now mentioned two examples, Ireland and Luxembourg. First, today, the Apple case could no longer occur. Ireland changed its corporate tax residence rules to prevent Irish incorporated companies from being stateless for tax purposes. Also, the Fiat case could not reappear today in Luxembourg. In the wake of the Fiat investigation, Luxembourg adopted substantial changes to its legislation to ensure compliance with the arm's length principles, and it has also clarified its tax treatment of financing companies. Beyond these very specific changes implemented by certain member states, a set of more wide-ranging legislative initiatives have been taken in the last decade. These initiatives were pushed by the Commission, supported by the European Parliament, and spurred by the momentum of the state aid investigations. In this respect, I would like to mention also two examples, and they relate to the legislative actions taken at the European level, following the discussions that became global discussions within the framework of the OECD. So first, the OECD anti-base erosion and profit shifting measures, they are now implemented by EU member states. And that is thanks to the EU Anti-Tax Avoidance Directive. Right now, as we speak, the Commission is checking how the implementation is going. Because you know how it sometimes is with directives, it takes a bit of time and not always transposed in the same way. Second, the EU also adopted the directive on global minimum effective level of taxation. If you speak OECD, you would know this is called Pillar 2. Building on the work of the OECD, we now have a minimum effective corporate tax rate of 15%. And of course, as you can hear, the code word here is effective. Because what we know is that you can really, really, really easily make the nominal tax rate go down. So effective is the key word. Despite these efforts, the unfortunate truth is that tax planning, also very aggressive tax planning practices, they still exist. The Commission, and that is my colleague Gentilone in Taxut, they publish this every year, a report on where we stand. And this report shows year after year after year that our combined effort has not put a stop to aggressive tax planning or tax avoidance within the European Union. So important to continue. Continue the work, continue the push. We should aim for more. After all, this is a problem. It unlevels the playing field of the single market. It distorts competition between big multinational groups and small businesses. So many small businesses, they work really hard to make a profit. From that profit, they pay their taxes. They are faced with competitors who do not pay their fair share. So also, taking into consideration that the effects are very often borne by other member states, because taxation then also escapes them. So, if nothing else, then I hope today will be an encouragement for you to continue your work, to continue venturing into where value can be taxed, where the creation of value can be taxed. If a robot or AI takes the place of an employee, well, there's no income tax anymore on that employee. There may be corporate taxation on the value creation. If that corporate taxation escapes the public coffers, of course, there is an issue when it comes to financing our infrastructure, health system, educational system, social care systems. So I hope that this can be an encouragement for you to continue the very, very important work done by this committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this interesting talk, Madam Vestager. So now I give the floor to EPP. Regina Doherty, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, Commissioner. You're very welcome. It's really good to have you here to exchange the views that we're sharing this morning about tax avoidance, because it really highlights how productive it is when we work well together, but also recognising that it is a competency of our own member states. But also, I'm conscious that we shouldn't forget the economic benefits of foreign direct investment in all of our member states, and that competitiveness that does come from tax competition within the EU creates jobs, it creates a competitive environment. So there's a balance here to be struck about being fair, but also being competitive. I want to thank you, obviously, for mentioning the Irish perspective this morning on the tax judgment. I, for one, and I think our country, are very happy that it's come to an end. But I think from Ireland's perspective, I think it's really important for me to state that this is a historic case, as you have stated, and it relates to opinions from Revenue back as far as 1991 to 2007. And as you mentioned, Ireland has already made significant changes in our taxation reforms and our tax codes to ensure that that wouldn't and couldn't happen again, and I think that's right. We're an active participant in all of the international tax discussions around improving the lot for all of the OECD countries. So, Commissioner, today my question I want to ask you, part of your remit is about tackling distortive effects of subsidies in our internal market. We have mentioned tax subsidies, but we don't seem to have the same concern about financial subsidies. The EU state aid rules were relaxed during COVID, and rightly so. Obviously, we were in a very emergency situation, and a crisis framework was established. But the normal rules haven't been fully re-established, and I think the dilution has created a huge imbalance within the single market, particularly in the area of financial state subsidies. And it's in favour of very large member states who have resources, huge resources, more than the rest of us, to be able to spend large amounts of money. In 2023, nearly 80% of EU state subsidies came from 2 member states, 85% came from 3 member states. And those increased financial subsidies are an expensive and sometimes really inefficient way of supporting big market players, and mainly at the expense of the other 24 member states. So I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on this situation and whether the area of financial state aid needs more focus from this committee and indeed from the Commission. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Regina. Now S&D. Oh, no, sorry, excuse me. Margaret, you reply.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for also opening this debate about what is the benefit of foreign direct investments. Just as a note, I think it will be most welcome that all member states will soon have the screening of foreign direct investments, because some foreign direct investments can also come with unwanted economic security concerns. So it's a very important debate, so I'll not go more into that now. When it comes to subsidies, for me it was very welcome that Draghi, in his report, called for a full stop to the part of the temporary framework that still exists. We have prolonged part of it in order to make sure that all member states who had issues, for instance, coming out of the energy crisis, that they have fair possibilities of doing so. We have at all times been doing the work of state aid control, because it is indeed so that some member states, they use the rules more than other member states. Because of that, it's really important that when the rules are used, that we minimize the potential disturbance of competition. And this is why, yes, we have temporary emergency set of rules, but we still do state aid control. And we've been following very closely with questionnaires to member states, both to see what kind of aid have they been giving out, loans, guarantees, grants. Have they actually paid out what they got approval of? And the striking thing is that during COVID, there was approved, I think, 4 times more aid than what was actually paid out. And that is good news for the level playing field. And I think it also shows the mechanisms of a crisis situation. That when we recognize this is something that is a very, very far-reaching crisis, we make sure that member states can take necessary measures. Business and citizens, they realize, okay, they're control of the situation. Things are not as bad as they could be. Everybody relaxes a bit. And the need for paying out the aid is actually not as big as what we thought. And the reason why I think the mechanism is such is that we cannot approve aid that is not necessary. It must be a necessary, otherwise, well, it's illegal aid. So I think there are some mechanisms here that are really interesting. There may be some learnings also from the temporary frameworks. For instance, when it comes to support for renewable energy, we have a very good, relatively new set of guidelines for aid to environmental, energy and climate action. But we have seen during the crisis that things might be possible to do faster than what was actually foreseen when we made the rules to do that. So I think it's a balancing act, because if the market cannot deliver what we want, we consider that a market failure. And sometimes that is beneficial for the market actually to move on, create the capacities to meet the needs if it gets a bit of aid beforehand. But I think the bottom line is that we cannot subsidize ourselves to good competitiveness. We can maybe give it a seed money, we can spur it, we can use this as a catalyst. But real competitiveness, that comes from competition, access to capital, clever, well-educated employees, fast permitting, and, you know, the rest of the palette that creates strong competitiveness.
Thank you. Now S&D, Bruno Gonçalves, please.
Thank you, dear Vice President. Thank you for joining us today and for the important work that you have been doing over the past 4 years. I will just, for this time, speak in my mother tongue, and I will switch then to Portuguese, waiting for your comprehension. Cara Vice-Presidente.
Dear Vice President, I wanted to thank you for your courage, as I have done on previous occasions, for ensuring that the law is complied with and for being at the service of the European Union. Major multinationals cannot see the single market as a buffet where they can pick and choose which rules to respect and which taxes to pay. The decision of the Court of Justice to ensure that 3 billion euro in tax money should be replaced, brings us back to what should be the normal state of affairs. We still have two questions, though. Competitiveness. It's at the heart of the current Parliament. We've got the Draghi report, the need for private and public funding for industrial development. Do we need tax incentives with an EU framework, clear rules for appropriate measures for fair competition? Is that a need? A level playing field will depend on the taxation due under traditional systems. If you have a digital platform that allows people to avoid tax and customs duties and engage in online commerce, what are the consequences for competition? Should international negotiations, for instance in the OECD on Pillar 1 and in relation to the G20 initiative to set up a new tax for digital platforms in the UK, digital platforms in the EU, with this then playing into the tax coffers. So this is also about ensuring a level playing field between larger and smaller companies. Since this is the last time that we will probably meet in this committee, I wanted to thank you for all of the hard work which you've done for being so committed to ensuring the level playing field across Europe.
Madame Vestager.
No, thank you very much. It's very kind of you to say so. It's appreciated. One of the things that is important when we discuss competitiveness, as I see it, is to go back to some of the fundamentals. Enrico Letta, in his report, More Than a Market, also pointed to this. Because one thing is to have level playing field, but if the market is fragmented, so you do not get the benefit of the 450 million internal market, well, then it can be as level as it can be, but you still feel that you're on an island and not in a dynamic marketplace that will allow you to develop your business. We both need new pushes for single market, that be in telco, that be in capital. Still in banking, we have a lot of barriers. And also on sort of what we consider traditional single market issues, we need a push to take down barriers. I think the European Roundtable, it consists of the 50 biggest European companies. They documented more than 100 barriers to the single market, big and small, that ought to be taken down. So I think it's really, really important that the Commission enforces, uses its infringement powers to show that there is a stick in order to produce also a carrot for member states not to produce new barriers and to take down those that we have already. Second, I think it is a very important push to ensure that Pillar 1 discussions continue. There's still some technical work to be done, but there was an agreement in principle. That agreement in principle ought to be translated into actual actions on ground. Because without actually, redistributing taxable revenue to where value is created, we will undermine the tax base for the long term. And I hope that this is one of the discussions in the subcommittee to really broaden the understanding of what it means to have a data-driven economy, where more and more transactions are not done in euros, but are done in data. And where it can be difficult to assess, well, where do the value creation then actually take place? So I think that is absolutely crucial. Because otherwise, well, the tax base will crumble, and the European model, our social contract, is that societies provide health, infrastructure, education, care for those who need it. So I think the work of this committee is as important as ever.
Thank you. Thank you. Patriot for Europe, Pierre Pampi, please.
Donc, I will be speaking in French, so I will give you an opportunity to reach for your headphones. I acknowledge all your achievements, but is there not a risk here of going too far? My background is in the rail sector, and there was a proposal to merge Alstom in France and Siemens in France, or a merger linking up those two companies. The merger proposal was abandoned. Is there not a risk here that we leave ourselves at a disadvantage compared to countries like China, where you can have huge, giant companies? Are we not weakening sectors such as the railways? Are we not weakening our industries by imposing rules that may make sense, but ultimately may come across as too stringent when compared to what is in place in other regions around the world? So, thank you.
Please.
Well, thank you very much. So let me take you back to the process of the Siemens-Alstom decision. It is now 5-6 years ago. I think the decision was taken in 2019. So Siemens and Alstom are two very important companies, and they wanted to merge their sort of the train part of the companies. Huge part of the transaction posed no question to competition, no risk to competition. There were two important markets where there were competition issues. One was mainline signaling. Mainline signaling, obviously really important, because modern mainline signaling, of course, prevents trains from running into each other, but also enables a smooth running of trains. So because of that, a better use of equipment and rail capacity. Here, there would have been a loss of competition. And the second market was in very high speed trains. I think everybody hopes at a certain time we'll be able to take a very high speed train, at least among capitals. So also a very important market for the future. Also here, a competition problem. The two companies, they could not or they would not solve these problems. When we have a competition case and there is an issue, it is for the merging parties to figure out, well, what to do. Very often, if there is an overlap, they will sell part of the overlap to a competitor so that there is still a challenge. Part of the discussion at the time was indeed the question of what role will Chinese companies play. But since these two problems could not be solved, we had no choice but to prohibit the merger. So this prohibition has been sort of the poster case for the discussion about merger control in Europe. So we just revisited the case to see, well, what happened in this very important market. So the first thing that we saw was that the Chinese, they are indeed big in China. And no wonder, because it's an almost closed-off market. It's very important for other companies to get into the Chinese market. But they're not really big anywhere else. So if you look at the market except for China, there are indeed two companies who are doing very well with filled order books. And those two companies, they are Siemens and Alstom. So the Chinese did not take the market. The companies are doing very well. So the real discussion about merger control is not a discussion about size. It's about how do you train to be competitive in the global market. Because I think we all wish for European companies to do good business in the global marketplace. And this makes it a discussion about, should you be challenged at home? Should there also be someone in your home market, in your European single market, that challenges you, that will, try to get you, that will innovate if you don't, that will give better services if you don't, that will give better prices if you don't? And that is the discussion here. Because we have had mergers to greatness in a number of incidents. Stellantis is a huge car producer created by a merger. AB InBev is a huge beer brewer created by a merger. We have mergers also in technology, and we have it in other foodstuff. So the merger rules is not a question about big and small. It's about whether or not you should be challenged to keep innovating, to keep providing good services, to keep providing good prices, which is what makes you win also global market shares. And this happens very rarely. So in these 10 years, I have overseen 3,000 mergers. I think, give or take, 100 companies have had to solve problems, maybe divest part of an overlap or something like that. And in 0.5%, it has been a prohibition or an abandonment. So we are always focusing very, very much on the real problems in order to make sure that every business is still challenged in order to do good in the global market.
Thank you. Now it's left. Jussi Saramo, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and a lot of thanks to Commission member. It was very interesting, and you have been doing good work, which I want to thank to, even though, of course, there is sadly much to do and also things that are not going in a good direction. It was indeed a very historical decision. Apple has to pay 13 billion euros to Ireland. But it's not, of course, it's not just Apple and not just Ireland. And Apple, it was stealing from all the Europeans. So if Ireland got few euros, all the others were losing fortunes. According to EU Tax Observatory 2024 Global Tax Evasion Report, $1 trillion corporate profits were booked in tax havens 2022. And half of this was inside European Union. And I think this should trigger us to have some kind of emergency mode in order to save welfare states and restore the market economy instead of this capitalist accumulation. But sometimes it looks like EU is doing the opposite. We are shortening the list of tax havens, and the worst actors are not even in the list. But I want to thank the Commission member to the straight, honest talk on what you said, considering Apple's so-called head offices, which existed only in paper, no tables, no chairs, no activities, no taxes, profits, anywhere. So normal people can see how sick this system is. And as an example, 2011, one of Apple's Irish subsidiaries recorded profits of approximately 16 billion euros and the effective tax rate of 0.05%. So how can you compete in this kind of system? So two main solutions to stop that: having a real list of tax havens in the EU with a very strong criteria, and then having a common EU corporate tax base, we have been talking today, so that the profits are taxed in EU countries where they have the real activity, where the money is made. And this could be achieved if the Parliament accepts our proposals on the BEFIT directive that is going to be voted future. And also this summer, 110 countries adopted the terms of reference for a UN tax framework convention, while 44 countries, including all EU countries, abstained from the vote, and 8 countries, including Israel, UK and US, voted against. And so I'm asking if EU starts to support this tax framework convention, since these multilateral agreements discussed in EU levels give answers to many of the threats that has been lifted here about competitiveness of European Union. Of course, we need EU solutions, but we also need global solutions. And this is something that I would like to hear more. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for recognizing the work, but also making it very clear that there is still a lot of work to be done. So as I see it, we always talk about small and medium-sized businesses being the backbone of the European economy. And there are, millions and millions and millions of those. And even though they are small, sometimes they are faced with competition from multinationals. And I think the least that we can do is to make sure that both pay their fair share, no more, no less. And this is why work should focus, because smaller businesses, they do not have the resources, and maybe they don't even want to do tax planning. They just work really hard to make a profit, and from that they pay their taxes. And also between member states, I think really important, because it was underlined initially, foreign direct investment plays a huge role. But as it is right now, foreign direct investment goes to some countries more than other countries. And some of the tax experts that I sometimes listen to, they say that, of course, part of the foreign direct investment is absolutely real and substantial, but part of it is not, because it really doesn't match the GDP of the countries. And this is why it is so important to keep pushing. As far as I have understood, my colleague, Paolo Gentiloni, responsible for taxation, still pushing for Pillar 1 to materialize. It is unfortunately not only technical barriers, but also political barriers that prevents that from happening. I would very much hope that there could be a new push for a common consolidated tax base. It was one of the great pushes in the first mandate that I hold, because it also holds the big promise of a more simplified approach. I know this is a common endeavor of this committee to see how can we push for simplification. Simplifications, I think, also is a way to make it more visible who pays their taxes where, because a complex, opaque system is also a system that makes it much easier to plan and to make quite complex setups. I can say one of the reasons why I really admire the case teams that have been doing these cases is that, it really takes dedication, before the first thing that you think of when you open a tax case is to close it again, if you have a life, because it is crazy complex to understand what is really going on. So also for that matter, it would be really good with a push for that common consolidated tax base. And I think there is still plenty of room for member states to compete about having the best environment for doing business. It will definitely not end that, and that also is kind of healthy.
Thank you indeed for the very interesting insight. Now we can have some catch the eyes. Then I will have one with some conclusion. And first of all, thanking again Margrethe Vestager for being here, but in particular for the work that has been done, which opens, I think, as well, rooms for our work here in this subcommittee. I would like to synthesize and then to pose a question. We realized today, in particular thanks to the work of Vestager, that tax rules do not escape competition rule. And thanks to that, actually, we managed to do some harmonization somehow, indirectly, which is good, I would say. However, the new challenge, I think, is the value of data. Data create basis for income without workers. We do not figure out yet how to classify it. We don't have in our tax offices income coming from data. But I think that more and more our economy activities will be dominated by small, but in particular large firms creating values out of data. We need to think how, first of all, I would like to ask if this is an issue. I mean, if this is something that will become more important, and if you have an idea how, if you have an idea how to figure out the value that is created and how to proxy a tax which can be appropriated for this kind of income. Thank you indeed again for being here, and thank you to everybody. I leave the last word to Madame Vestager.
No, thank you very much. And I think the remarks just made illustrates very well that this is an ever-developing issue. It's also actually part of the core of the new book of Noel Harari, you know, the one who wrote *Sapiens*. In his new book *Nexus*, he indeed discusses this. So I pay with my data, for instance, for search. My data is then sold on to someone who will do advertising. And the question is, of course, and then I may buy something, but maybe not from a business in my own country. It may be from a business in another country. So there is no traditional economic activity between me and the search engine. Between the owners of the search engine and the advertiser, there may be economic activity in a third country where the actual transfer of funds may be in a fourth country in question here. So quite difficult to assess. And this is why the Pillar 1 discussion is so important, because the idea here was to say that for the world's biggest companies, I think more than 750 million, you should dedicate part of your revenue to where you do your business and not as to where you're headquartered. And I think it's a rough proxy, but it's a good proxy because we need to get started. We cannot just leave it until we have the most sophisticated ways of dealing with this, because in the meantime, we will undermine the tax base. And this is why I think one should keep pushing for Pillar 1, both the technical side of it, but also to take down the political barriers, while, of course, at the same time, keep working on what is the alternative. Because it's very often very encouraging for people to pass sort of present, ready solutions if they realize that there is an alternative and that the alternative is not status quo. Because here the status quo is actually undermining the tax base over the years to come. And this is why, as said, I hope if nothing else, well, I take your thank you with me in my heart, and I will take them forward on a rainy day, but that I have encouraged you to keep pushing for this, because the status quo is not a status quo. And I think that is the important thing. And with a different point of view that comes together in here, I think you have, you know, the perfect fertile ground for solid and nuanced discussions. So thank you very much for the different perspectives today, and all the best for your future work.
Thank you. Thank you. We've done. Thank you. A small break, then we have the coordinator meetings. Keeping good going.
Is it true that